the entities of the book of Revelation. I'm going to have an overview here. Here is the original copy that I have printed by a printer up in the state of Washington. But since then, I've decided to print everything myself with pigmented ink rather than using toner. I don't really like toner. These high-speed laser printers print with toner. It's a plastic that's embedded on top of paper, and then it's heated and pushed in, but the ink goes into the paper itself, and you can bend the page, and it's not going to flake off or anything. Well, here's what I have now. It's in a 3-ring binder. Everything is the same, but it's in the binder, and it's available on our bookstore. It was published in 2016 by the Apostolic Press. That's the name I had for the books that I have been printing over the years. It's also downloadable from our bookstore in a PDF format. It's going to be basically our workbook for the current seminars that we're going to be going through with the book of the Apocalypse, or Revelation, if you will. The book features entities, which we'll later explain more in depth, but here's a picture of an entity. Now, so many entities, as you'll see, that it makes it difficult for a newcomer to keep them all straight. Thus, this book. You can look them up and find all kinds of information rather than trying to figure it out for yourself. Many of the entities are grammatically tied to the Greek Old Testament, called the Septuagint or LXX. And as we go through these seminars, more entities may be added, with more light being given to us as we go through in depth. When I put together the book, I did it all at one time, put all my efforts in to do the book, looking up everything as well as I could have, and that was then published. But now, as we go through all of the book of Revelation, I see more things that could be added that will occur, and for probably another edition of the book of the entities of the book of Revelation. Now, the book of Revelation can be either called the book of Revelation or the Apocalypse. Apocalypse is the Greek word transliterated into English letters, and Revelation is a translation of what the word means. Not a very good translation. Uncovered is way better, but it doesn't sound like the book of the uncovering. So Revelation has been around for a long time. But Apocalypse, there's a difference between transliteration and translation. When you have a Greek word, if it's epos, it means a horse, so you translate it into the word horse. But a transliteration is a little bit different. When you get to a Greek word, like we had epos for horse, if you get to the Greek word baptizo, then that means to be immersed. But by the King James translators, transliterated by using the same letters, the baptizo to baptize. So there's a difference between translation and transliteration. They both occur. Of course, the translation is most everything in the Apostolic Bible is a translation. A table of contents. Here's a picture of the table of contents, and you can see and go through it yourself, and we are going to go through all these listed contents in depth in these videos. Now, the book of Revelation is considered to be a mystery, much as Daniel, eschatological end-time mysteries. Daniel has calls mysterion, is a Greek word, appears in chapter 2 of Daniel 5 times, and all concerning Nebuchadnezzar, and then in chapter 4 2 times. In the book of Revelation, we have the mystery of the Revelation 1:20, the 7 stars. In Revelation 10:7, the 7th angel. And then chapter 17, verse 5, the woman, or Babylon, as a mystery. Now, the book of Revelation isn't found in most liturgies, if any. The liturgies, if you're not familiar with the liturgy is, it's a writing of ecclesiastics wrote, and people follow it in reading every Sunday the same thing, or it may vary in certain ways. And the pastor or the priest will say something in the liturgy, and then the people will refrain with another saying that's in that listing, in that book of the liturgy. And they had different liturgies for different times of the year. Generally, the liturgies are the words of Christ, or the Psalms, things like that. But most liturgies don't have the book of Revelation. Now, there's become a new interest with evangelical studies, or what's called a born-again experience, I suppose. And you see movies on the book of Revelation and the Apocalypse, Left Behind series, a movie called The Rapture, and current event expository things and pictures and graphs and prophecies that people have written books about. But the Apostolic Bible text is the basis for the book of Revelation that we are going to be studying. As of this time, the Apostolic Bible Polyglot is the only Bible that's numerically coded with the Greek Old and New Testament, and you can see the correlations between the two. The importance of the Old Testament Greek was mentioned in the Mishnah, written around the time of Christ. In Megillah 1:8, it says, Rabban Simeon b. Gamaliel says, the books, too, they have only permitted to be written in Greek, outside of course, the Hebrew originals. And this was Gamaliel that Paul sat under. As far as an interlinear Bible, the early manuscripts had interlinear handwriting with Greek on one line and Latin underneath the words. The Complutensian Polyglot of 1516 had a Greek-Latin interlinear throughout the books, 6-volume set. Here's a picture of that. The Apostolic Bible Polyglot now comes in PDF format, downloadable. First edition is free, or the 3-ring binder set, which is pictured here. We also have a quotes section, which comes with the New Testament of the 3-ring binder edition, and it's also available, the quotes is available by itself on our bookstore. Next, who was John? John. There were 6 Johns mentioned in the New Testament, and the name was pretty common. The first John mentioned was John the Immerser, or John the Baptist, if you will. Then there was the Apostle John, son of Zebedee, brother of James. The third was a kinsman of the high priest, mentioned in Acts 4:6-21. Fourth is John Mark. We know more as Mark, the writer of the book of Mark. And then 5, the elder John of 1st and 2nd John. The elder John may very well be different than the Gospel of John. And then there is the prophet John of the book of Revelation. The Gospel of John the writer never speaks in the first or third person, whereas in the prophet John of the book of Revelation, he does speak of himself in the first person, I, throughout the Apocalypse. The Apostle John's name was not mentioned in the Gospel of John as the writer, so we really don't know if the Gospel of John was written by John, but the word John was mentioned because he was an apostle. Interestingly, there's the John that calls himself an elder, 1st and 2nd John. So is this the same as the Apostle John, or is it a different John? Finally, there's the prophet John of the book of Revelation, who we'll be studying mainly here, and he was called a bondman by God in Revelation 1:1. He calls himself a brother or a partner in Revelation 1:9. He's mentioned as prophesying in Revelation 10:11, so thus he's a prophet. And the prophet John, which I call him a prophet John, never says that he was the disciple that Jesus loved. Doesn't mention Mary. He never mentions eyewitness events concerning Jesus. Now, the words of the Apocalypse have little to no affinity with the words of the Gospel of John. Completely different. Gospel of John was an eyewitness account of the things of Jesus, and the Apocalypse is an eschatological writing on things that are going to happen and so forth. The prophet John of Revelation never mentions having written a gospel, letters, or a major work. A Dionysius of Alexandria around 250 AD mentions the dissimilarity of the gospel with the Greek usage of the Apocalypse, and we'll put the link to that down below in the contents. Well, be it as may, there was a John who did arrive on the island of Patmos. Now, whether he was in chains, led there, as some suggest, or he was led by the Agios Pneuma, the Holy Spirit, which I would suggest. Now, the location of the writing of the book of Revelation was on the island of Patmos. We'll go through that a little bit later, not in this video, but another one where I showed pictures of when I was there. The island is off the coast of Turkey, and you can take a boat from Piraeus, a harbor for Athens, and go to the island of Patmos. Beautiful island. And it's fairly close to the 7 churches of the book of Revelation. Now, these 7 churches in Revelation, only 3 are mentioned in the New Testament: Ephesus, Thyatira, and Laodicea. But Smyrna, Pergamos, Sardis, and Philadelphia are not mentioned anywhere in the New Testament. So with these assemblies of the book of Revelation being well established, as you can see when we read it, or for them to be future assemblies, the book of Revelation is probably the last book of the Bible written. Now, early church acceptance was iffy. Revelation basically is 100% eschatological, end time, eschatology. And the questions were asked over the years, were the episodes mentioned in the Apocalypse something that was to happen immediately or in the future at that time? You see, in many places, people thought, like Napoleon, that was the beginning of Revelation. Hitler, the church I went to, they thought maybe Gorbachev was the head of the Soviet Union, was the Antichrist, and so forth. But the canon of the Bible was mentioned as the Apocalypse being part of the canon by Irenaeus, a church father in 180 AD, and then Clement of Alexandria in 200 AD, and Eusebius in 300 AD, all mentioned Revelation as being the canon. It wasn't considered, though, pertinent for the age, and the reading of it was lax. People at that time just couldn't relate to the things that are happening, and very difficult. I know that because the mainstream church that I grew up in, Protestant church, never taught the book of Revelation nor any of the prophets. It was always something that already had happened, which is called preterism, which we'll go into a little bit here. But with the evangelicals, it all of a sudden became something that was more important of the times, because we start seeing Israel becoming a nation, which I believe is a start of the biblical times, as well as it was with the time at the beginning of the Bible, as far as Jacob and then the 12 tribes, beginning of the history. And now we are going back in history, or we're going forward in history, with Israel today being a nation again. And the evangelicals, many see this as part of the apocalypse. Now, eschatological interpretations that have taken place over the years were first the idealists, whose belief was that the book of Revelation is an allegory, it's a story, and does not refer to actual people or events, sort of like Greek mythology. Then there were the preterists, who believe that the events in the book of Revelation occurred during the Apostolic age until the fall of the Roman Empire. That's what the church taught that I went to until I came back to an evangelical church years later. The historicist, his belief is that the events in the book of Revelation have occurred, are occurring, and will occur in a broad range of history. The millennialist belief is that the events in the book of Revelation happens in a future time or eon of 1,000 years in the future, with the return of Christ to the earth after the 1,000 years. Then there are amillennialists, who believe that the millennium, 1,000 years, has already begun and is the same as the current church age, and that the book of Revelation is relevant with today's events, as we mentioned, the country of Israel now becoming a fact. The ultra-dispensationalists believe that the book of Revelation on the whole is for a time after the church has been removed from the earth and a revelation of the beast is uncovered. I personally sort of fit into the ultra-dispensationalists after the first 3 or 4 chapters with the 7 churches, and after that, future event. But I may be wrong, and so be it. But the word that comes out of a lot of the study is rapture, harpazo. It's a snatch away, like an eagle goes down and grabs a hold of an animal, and off it goes back to its nest to feed its chicks. The rapture, and God is going to grab us. So the rapture is called by people pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib. This tribulation, terrible time, we are going to be raptured or snatched away before this tribulation period. The mid-trib is probably 3.5 years, because a 7-year period of time before everything goes into the terriblest time. Then we're taken out, and that would be the mid-trib, which I sort of kind of go along with. And then there's the post-trib, that after the 7 years, then the people will be taken. Then there's pan-trib, which the pastor of the church I went to talked about, and that was that all will pan out. So whichever one you choose is your option. And with this, we'll go into our next video with the 100 episodes of the prophet John.